Welcome back to this environmental series on CNC3. My guests today are Stelios Christopoulos, Chargé d'Affaires, the delegation of the European Union, Maria Sebastian de Erice, Spain's Deputy Head of Mission, and Christoph Pelaikis, Germany's Deputy Head of Mission. I was going to ask you this question just before the break. Stelios, it's a loaded one. In 2007, the European Parliament voted to increase recycling rates by 2020 to 50% of municipal waste and 70% of industrial waste. How's that working out in Europe?
Very well, actually, because if I'm not mistaken, we have more than 60,000 EU companies active in this particular field, with perhaps more than 500,000 workers in there. So when it comes to generating jobs, but also the contribution to the economy was great. And it was, above all, it was something that we all felt it corresponded to a need. All of us now in Europe, everywhere, we are used into using recycling, trying to prevent, reuse, recycle. It is in our daily life. We have selective garbage everywhere. We have selective garbage collection at municipality, district levels, everywhere. People going there, unless you do it and you are not disciplined, you can get fined and everything. But let me come back, if I may, to Trinidad and Tobago. With all due respect, and to be honest with you, I don't think you should be doing this because we did it in Europe or because they did it in the States or Canada. No, I don't think this is the reason. I think the same way we thought it corresponded to a need, the same way you need to do it here also in the Caribbean. And Trinidad and Tobago have a leading role in that respect, I think, only and to the measure that you identify your own interest in doing this. Because you want to preserve your coast, because you want to preserve your forests, because you want to preserve biodiversity, because you want to avoid soil erosion and water pollution, because you want to preserve a clean air. And only because you manage to identify your interest in this, you will manage to do it correctly. And you have very many means to do this, by way of improving the management of natural resources, by way of improving management of water resources, by way of actually making land more productive at the same time. That is how it contributes to development as well.
So, Stelios, you think it's a question of will, or do you think it's not economically viable for us? To what extent was Europe subsidized?
Actually, I think that let's talk about subsidies. Yes, Europe was subsidized, but it was subsidized mainly in order to create the right incentives to do things. But let's talk about subsidies. Subsidies here, for instance, you need to put on balance the subsidies you have in a country like Trinidad and Tobago. For instance, do you really need to go on subsidizing the price of oil? Or it would perhaps be better, more productive, economically speaking, but socioeconomically also, to perhaps think of better targeting existing subsidies? I'm not saying phasing them out, but perhaps target them better towards the most needy in the population, and then perhaps shift the burden of the taxes, and instead of taxing, let's say, labor, which increases the labor cost, as we all know, perhaps start taxing some bad behavior when it comes to pollution. Polluter pays, we say in Europe. So, and why not?
So it's also a question of legislation, managing our resources and enforcement. Maria, I want to come to you now. Spain continues to meet and exceed the targets set by the EU for 2020. As a country with a large construction sector, how has Spain tackled construction waste? We also have construction waste here, but we go for the landfills. We don't really know how to do the composting. Can you give us an idea of how you do it?
Well, as far as construction is concerned in Spain, and as I was saying before, we have learned from our achievements and our mistakes. And precisely, Spain was a country in which construction was huge for a couple of decades. These days, of course, the international economic crisis has had a big impact on that field. But then again, we have targeted the construction sector following an environmental policy. For instance, let's say regulations have been passed by our government according to which solar power installations should be put in buildings from certain characteristics. Also, we are trying to reduce the environmental impact that construction implies. For instance, our laws on coastal construction have been redone in a much more restrictive way, precisely to protect what has been one of our traditional sources of wealth, which was being spoiled in a way. So I think because Spain has had a big construction sector, our way of targeting it following environmental issues, I think it's a good example of what has been done.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the solar power, because I think both Germany and Spain have been at the forefront of alternative energy sources with solar power. And I understand Spain, you've got quite a lot of sun there, but Germany? Where do you get your sun? Both your countries also subsidize the alternative forms of energy. Does that make sense for us here?
Well, I would say absolutely, no?
I think so, of course. I think there is an enormous potential for Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to wind energy and solar energy as well. You have both of them, wind and solar power, even more sun than we have in Germany, and even with us it works quite well. I think it is a question for the state how to subsidize, how to put incentives to make these technologies work here as well. In Germany, for example, there are state funds to support people putting solar panels on their rooftops. So they will think of putting it because they get something from the state, and at the end of the day, they use less electricity from the usual official grid because they produce their own electricity. So I think these sort of incentives are what we have to talk about.
How much does it cost Germany?
What exactly?
To actually have solar power?
Well, I don't have any figures, of course, with me. It costs, but at the end of the day, it economizes because we have to import our energy to a high extent when it comes to oil and gas. Other sources of energy, like nuclear power, have their problems. So at the end of the day, it does not cost too much because it's good for the country and for the whole world, I guess.
Okay, well, we'll be back with much more. We need to take a short break. Don't go away.